The advertisement in the Cheyenne Leader was small, tucked between notices for cattle auctions and remedies for rheumatism, but Beatrice Hamilton read it 3 times before her hands stopped shaking. Rancher seeks bookkeeper, room and board included, experience with ledgers required. Inquire at the Double R Ranch 10 miles north of town. It was September of 1884, and she had exactly $4 to her name, a carpetbag full of practical dresses, and nowhere else to go after the bank where she had worked as a clerk closed its doors permanently last week. The ride out to the ranch cost her 50 cents she could not afford, but the driver of the supply wagon agreed to take her when she explained her purpose. The Wyoming landscape rolled past in waves of golden grass. The autumn sun warmed despite the crispness in the air that promised winter was not far behind. Mountains rose in the distance, their peaks already dusted with snow, and Beatrice tried to calm her racing heart by focusing on the practical matters at hand. She had kept books for the bank for 3 years, her penmanship was excellent, and her arithmetic had never once failed to balance. These were facts. These were things she could control. The Double R Ranch sprawled across a valley like something from a painting, with a sturdy 2-story house, a massive barn, and several outbuildings arranged with clear intention. Cattle grazed in distant pastures, and she could see men working near the corrals, their voices carrying faintly on the wind. The wagon driver let her off at the main house, tipping his hat before turning back toward town, and Beatrice stood alone with her carpetbag, smoothing her gray traveling dress and trying to look more confident than she felt. The door opened before she could knock, and the man who filled the doorway was not what she expected. He was tall, probably in his late 20s, with dark hair that needed cutting and eyes the color of storm clouds. His shirt sleeves were rolled up, revealing tanned forearms, and there was ink on his right hand, smudged across his knuckles like he had been fighting with a pen and losing. "You are here about the bookkeeper position," he said, and it was not quite a question. "I am. Beatrice Hamilton. I brought references from the First Bank of Cheyenne, though I should tell you the bank closed last week, so the references might not hold much weight anymore." She had learned that honesty, even uncomfortable honesty, was better than discovered deception. Something shifted in his expression, not quite a smile but close. "Reese Donovan. Come in, Miss Hamilton. If you can make sense of the disaster in my office, I do not care if your references come from the Queen of England or a saloon keeper." The house was well built but clearly lacked a woman's touch, with sturdy furniture that served its purpose and little else. He led her down a hallway to a room that must have been intended as a parlor or study, but now looked like a hurricane had torn through a paper mill. Ledgers lay open on every surface, receipts and bills scattered across the desk and floor, and a coffee cup sat precariously close to a stack of what looked like important documents. "This is my attempt at organization," Reese said, running a hand through his hair in a gesture that seemed habitual. "My father handled the books before he passed 2 years ago. I have been trying to manage ever since, but ranching I understand. Numbers on paper that need to balance and taxes that need calculating and supply orders that need tracking. Those might as well be written in Chinese." Beatrice set down her carpetbag and picked up the nearest ledger, flipping through pages of cramped, frustrated handwriting interspersed with calculations that had been crossed out and redone multiple times. Her trained eye caught errors immediately, transposed numbers and forgotten carries, but also something else, an underlying system that almost worked, like someone had understood the concept but not the execution. "You have been paying your bills," she said, because it was important to acknowledge what was working. "Your cattle records are detailed. You just need someone to translate this into proper accounting." Can you do it?" He was watching her with an intensity that made her aware of how close they were standing, both leaning over the desk, his shoulder nearly brushing hers. "Yes," she said, because she could, because she was good at this, maybe the only thing she was truly good at. "But I need to understand what you are offering." "Room and board," the advertisement said. "What are the wages?" $15 a month, plus your own room upstairs, meals with me and the ranch hands, and Sundays off unless there is an emergency." He paused, then added, "My housekeeper, Mrs. Chen, comes 3 times a week to clean and do laundry. She is the only other woman on the property regularly, but she is good company. The hands live in the bunkhouse and take their meals there mostly, except for Sunday suppers. You would be safe here, Miss Hamilton. I give you my word on that." $15 was not generous, but it was fair, and more importantly, it was $15 more than she currently had coming in. "When do you need me to start?" "Is right now too soon?" She untied her bonnet. "Show me where I can put my things, and then I want to see your filing system, if you have one." His filing system was a series of crates with labels like "important," "maybe important," and "probably not important," which would have been amusing if it had not represented 2 years of financial records. Beatrice spent the rest of that afternoon sorting through papers, creating stacks on the floor because the desk was too small, and filling 3 pages of a notebook with questions about expenses and income and things that did not make sense without context. Reese brought her coffee at some point, and later a sandwich, appearing in the doorway like he was checking to make sure she had not fled in horror. By the time the sun began to set, painting the room in shades of gold and amber, she had a basic understanding of the ranch's financial situation. It was not as bad as it looked. The ranch was profitable, the cattle operation sound, but the record-keeping was so chaotic that it was impossible to see the actual picture clearly. "You have money," she told him when he appeared again, leaning against the doorframe as twilight deepened outside. "You are making a profit. You just do not know how much because you cannot track it properly." Relief washed over his face, softening the hard lines around his mouth. "That is the best news I have heard in months. I kept thinking I was going under and just too stupid to see it clearly." "You are not stupid. You are a rancher trying to do a banker's job. There is a difference." She stood, wincing as her back protested hours of bending over papers. "I can fix this, Mr. Donovan. It will take time, probably several weeks to get everything sorted and organized properly, but I can do it." "Reese," he said, "if you are going to save my financial life, you should probably call me Reese. Then you should call me Beatrice." She had not realized until that moment how formal her life had become, how long it had been since anyone used her given name with permission. He showed her to her room upstairs, a corner space with windows facing both east and south, catching the last of the daylight. It was simply furnished with a bed, a wardrobe, a washstand, and a small writing desk, but it was clean and entirely hers, more private space than she had known since leaving her family home in Ohio 5 years ago. "Mrs. Chen will bring fresh linens tomorrow," Reese said from the doorway, not entering because she was beginning to realize, a man who followed the proprieties even when it might not be strictly necessary. "Breakfast is at 6, but if that is too early, I can have something kept warm for you." "6 is fine. I am accustomed to early hours." She hesitated, then added, "Thank you, Reese, for the opportunity. I will not disappoint you." "You already have not," he said. And then he was gone, his boots heavy on the stairs, leaving her alone in her new room with the sound of wind picking up outside and the distant lowing of cattle settling for the night. Beatrice unpacked her few belongings, hanging her 3 dresses in the wardrobe and setting her small collection of books on the desk. She had a volume of Wordsworth's poetry, a copy of Jane Eyre that had been read so many times the spine was cracked, and a book on advanced accounting principles that was less romantically inclined but more practically useful. As she prepared for bed, washing with water from the pitcher and changing into her nightgown, she realized she felt something she had not experienced in a long time. Hope. Small and fragile but real, the first week passed in a blur of papers and numbers. Beatrice arrived at the office each morning after breakfast, which she took in the kitchen with Reese, surprised to discover he cooked for himself with competence if not flair. Their conversations over eggs and coffee were brief and practical, focused on what she needed to know about the ranch operations, but there was an ease developing between them, a comfort in shared space and shared purpose. Mrs. Chen arrived on Tuesday, a small Chinese woman probably in her 50s with sharp eyes and a sharper sense of humor. She spoke English with an accent but perfect grammar, and within an hour of meeting Beatrice, she had assessed the situation with the frankness of someone who had no patience for dancing around the truth. "He needs more than a bookkeeper, Mrs. Chen said, scrubbing the kitchen floor with vigorous efficiency. "He needs someone to remind him to eat regular meals and get his hair cut and maybe have a conversation that is not about cattle prices. 2 years he has been alone in this house, working himself ragged." "I am just the bookkeeper," Beatrice said carefully, because it was important to establish boundaries, to not let herself imagine more than what was real. Mrs. Chen made a sound that clearly indicated what she thought of that statement, but she did not push, and Beatrice was grateful for it. The ranch hands were a varied group, mostly young men drawn to the freedom and hard work of ranching life. There was Tom, the foreman, a weathered man in his 40s who had worked for Reese's father. Miguel and Carlos, brothers from New Mexico who could rope and ride with artistry, and a handful of others whose names she learned gradually. They treated her with cautious respect, tipping their hats when they saw her, careful not to be crude or rough in her presence. But it was Reese she found herself watching, studying in unguarded moments when he did not realize she was observing. He rose before dawn and often worked until after dark, checking fences and cattle, breaking horses, fixing whatever needed fixing. He came to dinner exhausted, his hands rough and sometimes bleeding from rope burns or scrapes, but he always asked about her day, genuinely interested in her progress through his chaotic records. "I found 3 different feed suppliers you have been using," she told him one evening as they sat in the kitchen after supper, the dishes washed and put away. "You are paying different prices to each, and one of them is significantly higher than the others without offering better quality. If you consolidate with Morton's Feed, you could save almost $60 a year." Reese looked at her like she had just performed a magic trick. "How did you figure that out?" "I compared invoices and calculated the per-unit costs adjusted for delivery fees. It is basic analysis, really." She showed him the figures she had worked out, their heads bent together over her neat columns of numbers. "This is not basic," he said softly. "This is brilliant. Do you know how many hours I have spent staring at those invoices trying to decide which supplier to use? I finally just started rotating between them because I could not figure out the actual difference." She felt heat rise in her cheeks at the praise. "It is only arithmetic. It is only arithmetic, like ranching is only cows." He sat back, regarding her with those storm-colored eyes. "You have a gift, Beatrice. I hope someone has told you that before." No one had, not in those words, not with that genuine appreciation. At the bank, she had been competent, useful, but invisible in the way women in such positions often were. Here, In this kitchen, with the lamp casting warm light and the wind rattling the windows, she felt seen in a way that was both thrilling and terrifying. October arrived with cold rain and the first serious frost. The aspens on the mountainsides turned gold, then lost their leaves in great drifts, and the cattle were moved to lower pastures in preparation for winter. Beatrice had organized Reese's office into something resembling order, with proper ledgers for different accounts, a filing system that made sense, and a clear picture of the ranch's finances. "You are not just profitable," she told him during one of their evening sessions, which had become routine. "You are quite successful. Your costs are well managed, your cattle bring good prices, and your land investments have been smart. If you wanted, you could expand, maybe add another 100 head or invest in better breeding stock." Reese shook his head slowly, a smile playing at his lips. "My father would have loved you. He always said the ranch could be twice as successful if someone with a brain for business was running the numbers. He tried to teach me, but I was too stubborn, too certain I could figure it out myself." "Tell me about him," Beatrice said, because she had been curious about the man whose careful notations filled the older ledgers, whose system she had used as the foundation for her own organization. "He came out here in '68, after the war. Bought this land when it was nothing but grass and possibilities, built everything from scratch, working himself nearly to death for years." Reese's expression went distant, remembering. "He was tough, fair, and he loved this place with everything he had. When he died, from his heart just stopping one day while he was checking the north fence line, I kept thinking I had to be him, had to do everything the way he did. But I am not him. I am decent with horses and cattle, but the business side, that was always his strength." "You do not have to be him," Beatrice said gently. "You just have to be yourself and let other people help with the parts that are not your strength. That is not weakness. That is wisdom." He looked at her then, really looked, and something passed between them, a recognition that they were becoming more than employer and employee, something neither of them had quite named yet. The moment stretched, charged with possibility, until Reese cleared his throat and stood, breaking the spell. "It is late. You should rest. We have the cattle sale in town tomorrow, and I will need you to handle the payment and record everything properly." The cattle sale was Beatrice's first real venture into Cheyenne society since taking the position at the Double R. She dressed carefully in her best day dress, a dark blue wool that was practical but flattering, and accompanied Reese into town in the ranch wagon. The sale was held in the stockyards on the edge of town, a chaotic gathering of ranchers, buyers, cattle, and noise that overwhelmed her senses immediately. But Reese stayed close, guiding her through the crowd with a hand on her elbow, introducing her to other ranchers and businessmen as his bookkeeper with a pride in his voice that made her stand a little taller. She handled the transactions, recording each sale carefully, making sure the payments were correct and the receipts properly documented. It was satisfying work, using her skills in a practical, immediate way. "Reese Donovan, I heard you finally got smart and hired someone to save you from your own paperwork." The voice belonged to a woman probably in her early 30s, beautiful in the way of women who knew it, and used it deliberately, with auburn hair and green eyes that assessed Beatrice with cool interest. She was dressed expensively, her riding habit tailored and fashionable, and she touched Reese's arm with a familiarity that spoke of history. "Catherine," Reese said, and his tone was polite but not warm. "This is Miss Beatrice Hamilton, my bookkeeper, Beatrice Catherine Winters. Her father owns the Triple W Ranch." "How enterprising of you, Reese," Catherine said, smiling in a way that did not reach her eyes. "Though I am surprised you went with someone so young. I would have thought you would want someone more experienced, more settled." The implication was clear, and Beatrice felt anger rise hot and quick. But before she could respond, Reese spoke, his voice edged with steel. "Miss Hamilton is the best bookkeeper I have ever worked with, and I would trust her with the ranch's finances over anyone else, regardless of age or experience. Now, if you will excuse us, we have business to conclude." He guided Beatrice away, his hand still on her elbow, and she could feel the tension radiating from him. When they were out of earshot, he muttered, "I apologize for that. Catherine and there was an understanding once before my father died. It did not work out." "You do not need to explain," Beatrice said, though part of her desperately wanted to hear the whole story. "I do, actually." He stopped, turning to face her fully despite the crowd milling around them. "She wanted the ranch, not me. When she realized I was not going to be the gentleman rancher she imagined, that I actually work the land and get dirty and do not have time for parties and social climbing, she ended things. It was the best thing that could have happened, even if I did not see it at the time." "I am sorry," Beatrice said, because she could see the old hurt beneath his words, the wound that had mostly healed but still ached sometimes. "Do not be. If she had stayed, I would be miserable, and so would she." He smiled then, genuine and warm. "I would rather have an honest bookkeeper who can save me $60 on feed than a wife who wants me to be someone I am not." The comparison sent a thrill through her that she tried to suppress. She was the bookkeeper. That was all. But the way he looked at her, the way his hand lingered on her elbow just a moment longer than necessary, suggested that maybe, possibly, it was becoming something more. November brought the first real snow, 3 inches overnight, that transformed the ranch into something from a fairy tale. Beatrice woke to a world muffled and white, and when she came down to breakfast, Reese was already in the kitchen, frying bacon and watching the snow through the window with the expression of someone calculating how much hay the cattle would need. "Beautiful but costly," he said when he noticed her. "We will need to start feeding hay earlier than I hoped. That will cut into the winter supplies." "We have a buffer," Beatrice assured him. "I have been running projections. Even if we have a hard winter, we should be fine, as long as nothing catastrophic happens." "You have been running projections," he repeated, something like wonder in his voice. "Beatrice, do you know that before you came, I was just hoping to make it through each month without disaster. Now I have projections and buffers and actual plans." "That is the point of good bookkeeping," she said. But she was pleased, more pleased than she should be at his approval. They fell into a routine that felt almost domestic. Breakfasts together before Reese went out to work and Beatrice retreated to the office. Dinners in the kitchen where they talked about everything and nothing, the ranch and her progress, books they had read, stories from their pasts. She learned that he had wanted to be a veterinarian once, before his father's death made ranching a necessity. He learned that she had left Ohio after her parents died of influenza, needing to escape the memories and make her own way. "You must have been young," he said one evening, the fire crackling in the stove while sleet tapped against the windows. 20. Old enough to be alone, young enough to be stupid about it. She smiled ruefully. "I thought I could make a life in Cheyenne, be independent and respectable. Then the bank closed and I realized how precarious everything was." "I am glad you came here," Reese said quietly. "I know that is selfish, glad that your misfortune brought you to my door, but I am. This place is better with you in it. I am better with you in it." Her heart hammered against her ribs. "Reese, I am not saying this right." He ran his hand through his hair, that familiar gesture of frustration. "What I mean is, you have become important to me, not just as a bookkeeper, though you are brilliant at that, as a person. as someone I look forward to seeing every morning and talking to every evening. That is, if you could, would you consider?" He was fumbling, this confident rancher reduced to half-finished sentences, and Beatrice felt a surge of affection so strong it nearly took her breath away. She reached across the table and took his hand, rough and warm and solid. "I consider you important too," she said softly. "More than important. I think about you when I should be thinking about ledgers. I listen for your step on the stairs. I find excuses to be in the kitchen when you come in from the cold. If that is what you are trying to ask, then yes. Yes to whatever this is becoming between us." He turned his hand to lace his fingers with hers, and the simple gesture felt momentous, a crossing of a line they had been approaching for weeks. "I am not good at romance," he warned. "I work too hard and I am moody sometimes, and this ranch will always need tending." "I am not good at it either," she confessed. "I am too practical and I get lost in my work, and I have never been good at the games women are supposed to play." "Then we will be imperfect together," he said, and leaned across the table to kiss her. It was not her first kiss, but it was the first one that mattered, gentle and questioning and full of promise. When they parted, Beatrice felt like the world had shifted, rearranged itself into a new configuration where happiness was not just a distant hope, but something real and present and possible. The next few weeks were the happiest of Beatrice's life. She and Reese were courting, though that formal word seemed inadequate for what was happening between them. They were learning each other, finding the rhythms of partnership and affection. He brought her coffee in the office and listened to her talk about accounting with genuine interest. She helped him with the paperwork he still had to handle, letters to buyers and supply orders, making sure his words on paper matched his intentions. Mrs. Chen noticed immediately, of course, her sharp eyes missing nothing. "About time," she said approvingly one day while Beatrice was helping her prepare pies. "I told you he needed more than a bookkeeper." "We are taking it slowly," Beatrice said, though her smile gave away how she felt. "Slow is fine as long as you get there eventually." Mrs. Chen pointed a flour-dusted finger at her. "He is a good man. He will be a good husband. Do not let fear make you miss what is right in front of you." Beatrice had not mentioned marriage, and neither had Reese, but the idea hovered between them now, unspoken but present. They were moving towards something permanent, she could feel it, and the thought filled her with equal parts joy and terror. December arrived with serious cold, the kind that made the walls creak and the windows frost over in elaborate patterns. Reese and the hands worked constantly, breaking ice on the water troughs, hauling hay to the cattle, checking for animals in distress. It was brutal work, and Beatrice worried about him, watching him come in each night exhausted and chilled to the bone. "You are going to make yourself sick," she scolded one evening, helping him out of his frozen coat and pushing him toward the stove. "The cattle need tending," he said, but he let her fuss over him, drinking the hot coffee she pressed into his hands. "The cattle need you healthy enough to tend them through the whole winter, not collapsed from exhaustion halfway through." She softened her tone, touching his cold cheek. "Let Tom and the others handle more. That is why you have a foreman." "You are right," he admitted. I feel responsible for everything. Every cow, every horse, every blade of hay. If something goes wrong, it is on me." "It is on all of us," Beatrice corrected. "You have good men working for you, trust them. And trust me to make sure the money side stays solid so you can focus on the parts that actually need you." He pulled her close, wrapping her in an embrace that smelled of cold air and hard work. "What did I do to deserve you?" "You put an advertisement in the paper," she said against his chest. "And you were smart enough to hire me when I showed up." Christmas came quietly to the ranch. Mrs. Chen had gone to spend the holiday with her daughter's family in town, and the hands had mostly scattered to celebrate with friends or sweethearts. It was just Beatrice and Reese in the big house, snow falling steadily outside, the world reduced to the small circle of warmth they created together. Reese had surprised her with a gift, a beautiful leather-bound ledger with her initials stamped on the cover. "For all your projections and plans," he said, looking almost shy. "I noticed yours was getting full." She had made him a shirt, working on it secretly in her room during the evenings, careful neat stitches in dark blue fabric that matched his eyes. "So you have something that does not have holes worn through the elbows," she said, and was rewarded by his delighted laugh. They cooked dinner together, a chicken that Mrs. Chen had left prepared, with potatoes and carrots and a pie that was slightly lopsided but tasted perfect. They ate at the kitchen table, talking about everything and nothing, the future and the past and the present moment that felt suspended in amber, precious and fleeting. "I love you," Reese said suddenly, setting down his fork and looking at her with an intensity that made her breath catch. "I've been trying to find the right moment to say it, some perfect romantic setting, but I realize this is perfect. You, here with me. I love you, Beatrice Hamilton. I love your brilliant mind and your kind heart, and the way you look at my disaster of an office like it is a puzzle you cannot wait to solve. I love that you care about feed costs and cattle projections, and making sure I eat properly. I love you, and I cannot imagine this ranch, this life, without you in it." Tears pricked at her eyes, happy tears, overwhelmed tears. "I love you too," she said, her voice breaking slightly. "I did not think I would ever have this, someone who sees me for who I am and loves that person. You make me feel valued and important and cherished. I love you, Reese Donovan, and I want to build a life with you, whatever that looks like." He came around the table and pulled her to her feet, kissing her with a passion that made her dizzy. When they finally parted, both breathing hard, he rested his forehead against hers. "Marry me," he said. "I know it is fast, only been a few months, but I have never been more certain of anything. Marry me, Beatrice. Be my wife, my partner in all of this. Help me run this ranch and build something together." "Yes," she said, because there was no other answer possible, because this man and this place and this life was everything she had never known she wanted. "Yes, I will marry you." They were married in January on a clear, brutally cold day with the sun blazing off the snow and the sky so blue it hurt to look at. The ceremony was in the small church in Cheyenne, with Mrs. Chen and Tom as witnesses, and a handful of friends and neighboring ranchers gathered to celebrate. Beatrice wore a dress she had remade from one of her mother's, cream-colored wool with lace at the collar and cuffs, and carried a small bouquet of dried flowers that Mrs. Chen had somehow procured. Reese stood at the altar in a new suit, his hair finally properly cut, and when he saw her walking down the aisle, his expression was everything she needed to know about how he felt. The ceremony was brief and traditional, the words familiar but made new and meaningful by the fact that they were speaking them to each other. "I, Reese William Donovan, take you, Beatrice Ann Hamilton, to be my wedded wife. To have and to hold from this day forward for better, for worse, for richer, for poorer, in sickness and in health, to love and to cherish, till death do us part. I, Beatrice Ann Hamilton, take you, Reese William Donovan, to be my wedded husband. To have and to hold from this day forward for better, for worse, for richer, for poorer, in sickness and in health, to love and to cherish, till death do us part." The ring he slipped onto her finger was simple gold, warm against her cold hand, and when the minister pronounced them husband and wife, Reese kissed her with a joy that made the small congregation applaud. The celebration afterward was at the hotel dining room, A meal of roasted beef and vegetables and wedding cake that was almost too pretty to cut. Beatrice found herself passed from person to person, receiving congratulations and well wishes from people who had become neighbors and friends without her quite realizing it. Catherine Winters was notably absent, but Beatrice did not waste thought on her, too happy to care about old jealousies or slights. When they finally returned to the ranch that evening, the sun setting in a blaze of pink and gold, Reese carried her over the threshold in the traditional way, both of them laughing as he nearly dropped her in his effort to also close the door against the cold. "Welcome home, Mrs. Donovan," he said, setting her on her feet and cupping her face in his hands. "I have been home since September," she said softly. "I just did not realize it until now." Their wedding night was tender and awkward and perfect in the way of two people learning each other in a new way. Reese was gentle, patient with her nervousness, and when they finally came together, it felt like the natural continuation of everything that had been building between them for months. Afterward, lying in his arms in the bed that was now theirs, Beatrice felt a contentment so deep it was almost frightening. "What are you thinking?" Reese asked, his fingers tracing lazy patterns on her shoulder. "That I am happy," she said. "That I did not know life could feel like this. That I am grateful for everything that brought me here, even the hard parts. I am grateful for that bank closing," he said, and she could hear the smile in his voice. "Terrible for you at the time, I know, but I am grateful it sent you to my door." Winter deepened, and Beatrice settled into her new role as wife and partner with the same determination she had brought to organizing the ranch accounts. She continued managing the books, but now she also helped with planning for the spring, discussing breeding strategies and which pastures to rotate and whether they should invest in more land or better infrastructure. Their evenings became strategy sessions, working together at the kitchen table with ledgers and maps and plans spread between them. Reese had been right that she was brilliant with business, but what he had not anticipated was how well their skills would complement each other. He understood the land and the animals intuitively, could look at a cow and know if it was healthy or assess a horse's potential with a glance. She understood the economics, could calculate returns on investment and project costs, and identify opportunities. "We should buy the Anderson place," she said one evening in late February, pointing to a property on the map that bordered their northern fence line. "I heard in town they are thinking of selling. It would give us access to the creek year-round and another 200 acres of good grazing land." Reese studied the map, then looked at their financial records. "Can we afford it? If we negotiate well, yes. It would be tight the first year, but the long-term benefits outweigh the short-term costs." She showed him her calculations, neat columns of numbers that painted a clear picture. "And if we have a good calving season, we could pay down half the loan by fall." "You are already thinking in terms of loan repayment schedules," he said, shaking his head in amazement. "A few months ago, I was just hoping to keep the bills paid." They made an offer on the Anderson place in March, and after some negotiation, secured it for a fair price. The expansion was both exciting and terrifying, a gamble that they had the resources and skill to make it work. But working together, planning and executing as a team, Beatrice felt confident in a way she had never experienced before. Spring arrived like a revelation, the snow melting in great rushing torrents, the grass greening almost overnight, and the aspens budding with new life. The cattle were moved to higher pastures, and calving season began in earnest, a chaotic period of round-the-clock vigilance and occasional heartbreak when a calf or cow did not survive. Beatrice found herself helping more with the physical work of the ranch, not because Reese asked, but because she wanted to be part of it all. She learned to ride competently if not expertly, to recognize which cows were close to calving, to help with the simpler veterinary tasks. Her hands, which had always been soft and ink-stained, developed calluses and rope burns, and she wore them with pride. "You have become a rancher," Mrs. Chen observed one day, watching Beatrice come in dusty and tired from helping move cattle. "Not just a bookkeeper anymore." "I am whatever the ranch needs me to be," Beatrice said, and realized it was true. She had found her place, not by filling a single role but by being willing to adapt, to learn, to become part of something larger than herself. The summer was busy with haying and fence repairs, and the constant work of maintaining a ranch twice the size it had been. Reese hired 2 more hands to help manage the expanded operations, and Beatrice handled all the logistics, making sure everyone was paid properly. Supplies were ordered on time, and the accounting stayed organized despite the increased complexity. In July, she realized her monthly courses were late. She waited another week to be certain, then told Reese one evening as they sat on the porch watching the sunset paint the mountains purple and gold. "I think I am pregnant," she said, the words both terrifying and wonderful. Reese went very still, then turned to her with an expression of such joy it made her eyes sting with tears. "Are you sure?" "As sure as I can be without seeing a doctor. All the signs are there." She took his hand, placing it on her still flat stomach. "We are going to have a baby. In the winter, probably February." He pulled her into his arms, holding her carefully like she might break. "A baby," he said wonderingly. "Our baby. Beatrice, you have given me everything. The ranch running smoothly, a partnership I never dreamed of, and now this. I do not know what I did to deserve you, but I will spend the rest of my life trying to be worthy of it." "You already are," she said against his shoulder. "You gave me a home when I had nowhere to go. You saw me as an equal when others saw me as just a bookkeeper. You loved me for who I am, not who you wanted me to be. We deserve each other, Reese. We built this together." The pregnancy was not easy. Beatrice suffered from sickness that lasted well into the afternoons, and by October she was too tired to do much beyond the essential bookkeeping. Reese fussed over her constantly, bringing her tea and bland foods, insisting she rest when she wanted to push through. "The books can wait," he said firmly when she tried to work through a wave of exhaustion. "You and the baby are more important than any ledger." "The books are how we afford to feed the baby," she pointed out, but she let him guide her to the sofa, accepting the blanket he tucked around her. Mrs. Chen came more often, helping with the housework and cooking, and offering the kind of practical advice that only someone who had been through it herself could provide. "The sickness will pass," she assured Beatrice. "And then you will have a few good months before you get too big to be comfortable. Take advantage of that time." She was right. By November, Beatrice felt better, the sickness fading, and she had a burst of energy that everyone called nesting. She organized the nursery in the spare room upstairs, sewing blankets and tiny clothes, arranging the cradle that Reese built with his own hands. She also threw herself back into the ranch work, determined to have everything in perfect order before the baby arrived. "We had a good year," she told Reese one evening in early December, showing him the final tallies. "Better than projected. The Anderson land paid for itself already with the increased herd size. If next year is even half as good, we will be in excellent shape." "You did this," Reese said, looking at the neat figures that represented months of careful planning and hard work. "None of this would have happened without you." "We did this," she corrected. "I just kept the books. You made all the right decisions about the cattle and the land and the operations. We are a team, remember." Winter came hard and fast, snow arriving in late December and not stopping. By January, they were buried under several feet, and Beatrice could barely waddle around the house, enormous with the baby that seemed determined to take up every available inch of space inside her. She was uncomfortable and short-tempered and tired of being pregnant, ready for this baby to arrive. "Any day now," she muttered, struggling to reach her own feet to put on her shoes. "Let me," Reese said, kneeling in front of her and gently helping with her boots. "You know you do not have to come to the office. Everything can wait." "I will go insane if I just sit around waiting for this baby," she said. "At least in the office I can work on the tax preparations and feel useful." The baby decided to arrive on a night in the middle of February during a blizzard. Beatrice woke to pain gripping her middle and water soaking the bed, and she shook Reese awake with a hand that trembled slightly. "It is time," she said, and saw fear flash across his face before determination replaced it. They had prepared for this, knowing that the midwife from town might not be able to get to them in bad weather. Mrs. Chen had promised to come at the first sign of labor, but when Reese went to the window, he swore softly. "The snow is coming down so hard I can barely see the barn. No one is getting here tonight." "Then it is just us," Beatrice said, trying to stay calm despite the fear clawing at her chest. "Mrs. Chen told me what to expect. You will have to help me." The next hours were the longest of her life. The pains came in waves, growing stronger and closer together, and Reese stayed with her the entire time, holding her hand, wiping her face with cool cloths, speaking soft encouragement even though she could see he was terrified. She had never loved him more than in those hours, this strong man reduced to helplessness by his worry for her. "You are doing so well," he said over and over. "You are the strongest person I know, just a little longer." When the baby finally came in the darkest hours before dawn, arriving with a lusty cry that filled the room, Reese caught his son with shaking hands and tears streaming down his face. He cleaned the baby carefully, following the instructions Mrs. Chen had given them, then placed the tiny, perfect boy in Beatrice's arms. "A son," Reese said, his voice breaking. "We have a son." Beatrice looked down at the wrinkled red face, the tiny fists waving, the dark eyes that would probably turn blue like his father's, and felt love so fierce it was almost painful. "Hello, little one," she whispered. "We have been waiting for you." They named him James, after Reese's father, and by the time the storm cleared 2 days later and Mrs. Chen was finally able to make it to the ranch, the three of them had figured out the basics of keeping a newborn alive. Mrs. Chen checked them over with her practiced eye and pronounced both mother and baby healthy. "You did well," she told Reese approvingly. "Not many men could have handled that." "I did not have a choice," Reese said, but there was pride in his voice. "They are my family. I would do anything for them." The first months with James were exhausting and wonderful in equal measure. Beatrice learned to work with a baby sleeping in a basket next to the desk, to nurse him while reviewing ledgers, to calculate feed costs while singing lullabies. Reese was a devoted father, taking the baby in the evenings so Beatrice could rest, walking the floor with him when he was fussy, changing diapers without complaint. "I never knew I could love something this much," Reese said one night, holding his sleeping son and looking at him with wonder. "It is terrifying and amazing at the same time." "That is parenthood," Beatrice said softly. "Everything you never knew you wanted and were always afraid of losing." Spring arrived, bringing new life to the ranch. The cattle calved successfully. The hay fields greened, and James grew from a tiny newborn into a baby with personality, smiling at his parents and reaching for everything within his grasp. Beatrice slowly returned to full work, finding rhythms that accommodated motherhood and ranching and partnership. The years that followed were full and rich, marked by both challenges and triumphs. There were hard winters when they lost cattle to cold and predators, and good years when everything went right, and they made enough profit to invest in better breeding stock and more land. There were times when Beatrice and Reese argued about decisions, her practical caution butting up against his willingness to take risks, but they always worked through it, learning to trust each other's judgment. James grew into a sturdy toddler with his father's coloring and his mother's sharp mind, and when he was 3, Beatrice found herself pregnant again. This time, the pregnancy was easier, her body knowing what to expect, and in the spring of 1888, she delivered a daughter they named Sarah, who had Beatrice's auburn hair and Reese's storm-colored eyes. "Our family is complete," Reese said, holding his daughter while James demanded to see the baby from his vantage point on Beatrice's lap. "For now," Beatrice said with a smile. "Who knows what the future holds?" The future held prosperity and growth. The Double R Ranch became one of the most successful operations in the territory, known for quality cattle and honest dealings. Much of that success was due to Beatrice's management, her ability to see opportunities others missed and plan for challenges before they arrived. But she always insisted it was a partnership, that none of it would have worked without Reese's instincts and knowledge and willingness to work harder than anyone she had ever known. Wyoming became a state in 1890, and with it came new opportunities and new challenges. Beatrice and Reese attended the statehood celebration in Cheyenne with their 2 children, marveling at how much had changed since that day in 1884 when she arrived at the ranch with $4 and a carpet bag full of dreams she had not quite articulated. "You ever regret it?" Reese asked one evening as they sat on the porch, watching James and Sarah play in the yard while the sun set behind the mountains. "Giving up the chance to live in town, to have a more conventional life?" "Never," Beatrice said without hesitation. "This is exactly the life I was meant to have. I did not know it when I answered your advertisement, but I was not just looking for a job. I was looking for home, for purpose, for you and everything we have built together." "You were hired to keep my books," Reese said, pulling her close. "By winter, you were keeping my whole life together. My heart, my home, my future. Everything that matters." "We kept each other together," she corrected, because it was important to her that he understood. That is what marriage is, what partnership is. Not one person saving the other, but both of them choosing every day to build something better together. The children grew, and the ranch grew with them. James showed an aptitude for the land and the animals, while Sarah had her mother's head for numbers and planning. By the time James was 10 and Sarah was 7, they were both helping with the ranch in meaningful ways, learning the lessons their parents had learned about hard work and partnership, and the satisfaction of building something lasting. In 1894, when James was 9 and Sarah was 6, Beatrice found herself unexpectedly pregnant again. She was 36, older than was comfortable for childbearing, and both she and Reese worried through the entire pregnancy. But in the spring of 1895, she delivered a healthy son they named Thomas, after Reese's loyal foreman who had become like family over the years. 3 children, Reese said, holding his newest son with the ease of experience. "Our house is going to be so loud." "It already is," Beatrice pointed out, listening to James and Sarah arguing about whose turn it was to gather eggs. "This is just adding to the joyful chaos." Mrs. Chen, now in her 60s but still coming regularly to help with the housework, laughed at that. "Joyful chaos is a good name for family. Better than quiet loneliness." The turn of the century found the Donovan family thriving. James was a teenager, already taller than his father, and showing the kind of instinct for ranching that promised he would take over the operation someday. Sarah was 12, helping her mother with the increasingly complex business operations and showing no interest in the traditional expectations for young women. Thomas was 5, wild and adventurous, and keeping everyone on their toes. Beatrice was in her early 40s, her auburn hair starting to show threads of silver, but she had never felt more vital or alive. The ranch was successful beyond anything she and Reese had imagined that first year, spanning thousands of acres and running hundreds of head of cattle. They employed a dozen men year-round and more during the busy seasons, and every aspect of the operation was organized and efficient thanks to her management. But more than the success, more than the prosperity, was the life they had built together. The partnership that had started over chaotic ledgers and desperate hope had deepened into something unshakable. They had weathered storms together, literal and figurative. They had celebrated triumphs and mourned losses. They had raised children and built a legacy. You remember that first day? Beatrice asked one evening, standing with Reese on the porch as the sun set over the mountains, painting the sky in shades of fire and gold. When I arrived with my carpet bag and $4, and you showed me your disaster of an office, I remember thinking you were going to turn around and leave the minute you saw it, Reese said, wrapping his arm around her waist. I remember being desperate enough to hope you would stay anyway. I remember thinking this was my last chance, she confessed. That if this did not work, I did not know what I would do. I was so scared but trying so hard to seem confident. You were confident, Reese said. Or maybe you were just stubborn enough to fake it convincingly. Either way, you saved me, Beatrice. Not just the ranch, but me. I was drowning before you came, trying to be something I was not, trying to do everything alone. You showed me what partnership could be. You saved me too, she said softly. You gave me purpose and respect and love when I did not think I would ever have any of those things. You saw me as an equal when the world was telling me I should be grateful for any position at all. You built this life with me, not for me. They stood together in the fading light, surrounded by the land they loved and the family they had created, and Beatrice felt a contentment so deep, it brought tears to her eyes. This was what she had been looking for without knowing it. That day she read the advertisement in the newspaper. Not just employment, but belonging. Not just survival, but purpose. Not just a place to live, but a home to love. The children came out to join them, James carrying Thomas on his shoulders while Sarah walked beside them, and the 5 of them stood together watching the stars emerge one by one in the darkening sky. This was their legacy, Beatrice thought. Not just the successful ranch or the financial security, but this moment, this family, this love that had grown from desperation and hope into something solid and lasting. "What are you thinking about, Mama?" Sarah asked, always perceptive. "How lucky I am," Beatrice said, looking at each of their faces in turn. "How grateful I am for all of this, for all of you. How glad I am that I answered that advertisement 16 years ago." "Best decision you ever made," Reese said, kissing her temple. "Second best," she corrected. "The best decision was saying yes when you asked me to marry you." "I think we can call it a tie," he said, and they all laughed, the sound carrying across the quiet evening, a marker of joy and connection and the life they had built together from nothing but determination and love. Years continued to pass, marked by the rhythms of ranch life and the milestones of family. James grew into a man who was everything his father and grandfather had been, strong and fair and devoted to the land. He married at 22, a rancher's daughter named Elizabeth, who reminded Beatrice of herself at that age, practical and smart and unwilling to settle for less than partnership. They built a house on the far end of the property and started their own family, giving Beatrice and Reese their first grandchildren. Sarah proved to be even more brilliant with business than her mother, attending a women's college in the East and returning with ideas about modernizing the ranch operations that were both innovative and practical. She never married, choosing instead to pour her energy into the ranch and eventually into Wyoming politics, becoming one of the first women elected to the state legislature after women's suffrage passed. Thomas was the wild card, loving the ranch but also loving adventure. He spent several years traveling, working on ranches across the West, and sending letters full of stories that made his parents simultaneously proud and terrified. But he always came home and eventually settled into managing the horse breeding program, developing a reputation for quality that brought buyers from across the country. Through it all, Beatrice and Reese remained at the center, the foundation on which everything else was built. They aged together, Reese's dark hair going silver, Beatrice's face gaining lines that spoke of years spent squinting at ledgers and smiling at her family. Their bodies grew less resilient, their movements slower, but their partnership remained as strong as ever. In 1910, when they had been married for 24 years and Beatrice was 52, Reese had a scare with his heart that reminded them both how precious and fragile life was. He recovered, but the incident prompted them to start truly planning for the future, for the ranch's continuation after they were gone. "James can run the operations," Reese said during one of their planning sessions. "He has the instinct and the knowledge. Sarah should handle the business and legal side. Thomas can manage the horses. It will work if they work together." "They will," Beatrice said with confidence. "We taught them how. Partnership, respect, playing to each other's strengths. They watched us do it their entire lives." "You did most of the teaching," Reese said. "I just showed them how to rope and ride. You showed them how to work hard and be fair and care about the people who depend on you," Beatrice corrected. "Those lessons are just as important as anything I taught them about accounting." They called a family meeting, all 3 children plus Elizabeth and the grandchildren, and laid out their plans for the ranch's future. It was emotional and practical in equal measure, acknowledging both the reality of mortality and the hope for continuation. By the end of it, everyone understood their role and their responsibility, and Beatrice felt confident that the ranch would thrive long after she and Reese were gone. But that day was still far off. They had more years ahead of them, years of watching grandchildren grow and the ranch prosper and the world change around them. The automobile arrived, replacing some of the horses. Electricity came to rural Wyoming, bringing lights that did not need oil lamps. The world was becoming modern, but the ranch remained timeless, rooted in the land and the work that had sustained it for decades. On their 30th wedding anniversary in January of 1915, the family threw them a celebration at the ranch, inviting neighbors and friends from across the territory. Beatrice wore a new dress, deep blue like the one she had worn to the cattle sale all those years ago, and Reese wore a suit that actually fit properly, having finally given in to Sarah's insistence that he needed proper formal wear. They danced in the barn, which had been cleared and decorated for the occasion, while a hired band played waltzes and reels. Beatrice's feet hurt from the unaccustomed heels, and Reese was self-conscious about his dancing, but neither of them cared, too happy to worry about such small discomforts. 30 years, Reese said as they turned slowly to the music. "It feels like yesterday and a lifetime ago at the same time." "I know exactly what you mean," Beatrice said, resting her head against his shoulder. "I can still remember how scared I was that first day, how uncertain about everything. And now I cannot imagine any other life than this one." "You were supposed to just keep my books," he said, echoing words from years before. "Instead, you kept my whole life together. You still do, every single day. We keep each other together, she said, the correction automatic after so many years. That is what we do. That is what we have always done. The party went late into the night, with toasts and stories and laughter that filled the barn with warmth despite the January cold outside. When it was finally over and they climbed the stairs to their bedroom, both exhausted but happy, Beatrice felt grateful for every moment, every choice, every twist of fate that had brought her to this place and this life. They continued for many more years, gradually stepping back from the day-to-day operations as age and health required, but never fully retiring. There was always something to oversee, some decision that needed their input, some crisis that benefited from their decades of experience. The ranch was their legacy, but more than that, it was their life's work, and they poured themselves into it until the very end. Reese passed away in his sleep in the summer of 1922 at the age of 66, his heart simply stopping after a full day of helping James with fence repairs. Beatrice woke to find him gone, and the grief was a physical pain that made it hard to breathe. After 43 years together, after building a life and a family and a legacy, the loss was almost unbearable, but she was not alone. Her children gathered around her, and her grandchildren, and the community they had been part of for decades. They mourned together, celebrating a life well lived and a man well loved. At the funeral, Beatrice stood with dry eyes, having cried herself empty in private, and spoke about the man Reese had been. He was a rancher and a father and a husband, she said, her voice steady despite the ache in her chest. He was fair and hardworking and honest. He believed in partnership, in building something together rather than alone. He taught our children by example how to live with integrity and purpose. He gave me a home when I was lost, and love when I did not think I would ever have it. I was hired to keep his books, but by winter, I was keeping his whole life together, and he was keeping mine. We built this life together, and I will be grateful for every moment of it until the day I join him. After Reese's death, Beatrice gradually stepped back from active ranch management, trusting James and Sarah and Thomas to continue what she and Reese had started. She spent her remaining years surrounded by family, watching grandchildren grow and great-grandchildren arrive, the legacy expanding in ways she had never imagined that day in 1884, when she stepped off the supply wagon with $4 and hope. She kept a smaller version of the office in her room, still tracking the ranch's finances out of habit and interest, still offering advice when asked. She wrote down the story of how she and Reese met and built the ranch, wanting the future generations to know where they came from and what it had taken to create the life they now enjoyed. Beatrice died peacefully in her sleep in the winter of 1928 at the age of 70, surrounded by the family she and Reese had created and the legacy they had built together. At her funeral, Sarah read from the account her mother had written, the story of a desperate woman answering an advertisement and finding not just employment but purpose, partnership, and love. She was more than a bookkeeper, Sarah said, looking out at the gathered crowd that included family, neighbors, ranch hands past and present, and people from across Wyoming who had known and respected her. She was a businesswoman before that was common, a partner when women were expected to be subordinate, a builder of legacy when others said she should just be grateful for a position. She taught us that strength comes in many forms, that intelligence and determination are just as valuable as physical prowess, and that the best way to live is in partnership with those you love, working towards something larger than yourself. The ranch continued to prosper long after both Beatrice and Reese were gone, a testament to the foundation they had built and the lessons they had taught. The Double R became one of the most respected operations in Wyoming, known for quality and integrity, and the unusual history of being built by a partnership between a rancher and his bookkeeper wife. James's children and grandchildren carried it forward, along with Sarah's brilliant mind for business and Thomas's legacy in horse breeding. They all understood that what made the ranch special was not just the land or the cattle or the success, but the story of how it had been built, the partnership that had started with a simple advertisement and grown into something that changed not just 2 lives but generations of lives. In the ranch house, in the office that had once been a disaster of papers, and now was a model of organization, a framed piece of yellowed newsprint hung on the wall. It was the original advertisement from the Cheyenne Leader in September of 1884. Rancher seeks bookkeeper, room and board included, experience with ledgers required. Inquire at the Double R Ranch 10 miles north of town. Below it, in a frame of matching aged wood, was a photograph taken on Beatrice and Reese's 30th wedding anniversary. They stood together on the porch of the ranch house, his arm around her waist, both of them looking not at the camera but at each other, their expressions speaking of a love that had weathered decades and emerged stronger for it. And beneath that, in Beatrice's careful handwriting on a small brass plaque, were the words that became the ranch's unofficial motto, the summary of everything they had built and been to each other. Hired to keep his books. By winter, keeping his whole life together. Built together, loved together, partners forever. The story of Beatrice and Reese Donovan became part of Wyoming lore, told and retold with variations but always keeping the essential truth at its core. A woman with nothing but skills and determination. A man with a ranch and a dream but no way to manage the complexity. And the partnership they built that proved love could be both practical and profound, both a meeting of minds and a joining of hearts. Their great-grandchildren, and eventually their great-great-grandchildren, grew up hearing the story, understanding that the ranch they called home existed because 2 people had chosen each other, had worked together, had built something lasting from nothing but hope and hard work and a willingness to trust in partnership. And on cold winter nights, when the snow piled deep and the wind howled around the sturdy ranch house that had sheltered generations, family members would gather in the warm kitchen and tell the story again, keeping alive the memory of the cowboy who hired a bookkeeper and found so much more, and the woman who arrived with a carpet bag and $4 and built a legacy that would last forever. The Double R Ranch stood as a monument not just to successful ranching, but to the power of partnership, the strength of love, and the truth that sometimes the best things in life come from desperate circumstances and unlikely meetings. Beatrice had been hired to keep books, but by winter, she was keeping Reese's whole life together. And he, in turn, had given her a life worth keeping, a home worth building, and a love worth every risk she had taken to find it. Their story was complete, a closed circle of love and legacy, partnership and prosperity, beginning and ending in the land they loved and the family they created. And in that completeness, in that fully realized life built together from nothing, was everything anyone could hope for from a love story set against the wild beauty of the Wyoming frontier. 2 people meeting by chance, choosing each other by design, and building something together that outlasted them both, a testament to what could be achieved when hearts and minds worked in harmony toward a shared dream.